Thank you, Rebecca. I'm genuinely honored and pleased to be reading with Kelly and Katie today. Before I begin reading this excerpt from my novel titled Set Something Free, you should know a few facts. Willow is the main character. After the trauma of losing her sister to terminal cancer, she quits her high-paying career, and moves to the mountains, unwittingly estranging herself from her mother along the way. Murphy is her horse, the most important thing in her life right now. And these scenes are memories that overwhelm her in the opening chapter of the book. Willow always connected the memory of that phone call to the trip she took home just a few weeks later. Daisy and her mom had put up the fresh produce over the summer, but they had frozen the strawberries so Willow could come help with the jam. The steaming pot, tongs, and gelling fruit had been a part of her life for as long as she could remember. In fact, her earliest memory was a faded wooden spoon, frothy with the foam off the top of the bubbling jam, her grandmother's pursed lips blowing to cool it and then saying, "Here, taste this." On that visit, she stayed in her childhood bedroom, not that you could tell it had ever been hers. Even as Willow took her boxes to the car to leave for college, her mother was transforming the space into an office. At Willow's raised eyebrows, she said, "Don't worry, I'll have a daybed in here for you." Almost 15 years later, Willow had stretched on that very same daybed with the very same mattress when she woke on the day before they were supposed to do the canning. She wandered on the pebbled stepping stones out to her mother's garden, bent and brown in the weak October light. The vibrant tomatoes and green beans were just bent stalks, waiting for someone to clear away their traces, their fruits preserved in bell jars inside. Later that afternoon, she had drunk 4 glasses of wine in Daisy's small apartment. They avoided the words terminal cancer as the giant elephant in the room. Daisy was putting together an end table and Willow kneeled on the carpet, opening plastic bags and handing her screws. They were playing the oldies stations to pick up the songs from her mother's CDs that they used to sing together. While Willow sipped at her wine, she wondered what the point was in building this end table. What the point was in anything, really. Daisy could have 4 months. In the best world, she could have more than a year. Why did we bother with life when it only ended in death? Daisy's voice brought her out of her reverie. "I'm putting that geranium cutting from Mom on this end table." She nodded toward the scraggly plant on the windowsill in the kitchen. "Why?" Willow's question was out before she could stop it. "It's pretty. It makes me happy," Daisy said, sidestepping the elephant and thoughts of an end. By the time Willow headed back to their mom, she had a day drinking hangover. Daisy went to bed early these days, tired from her treatment. On that old daybed mattress, both too hard and too soft, she stared at the popcorn ceiling until her eyes tricked her into seeing the jutting pieces as recessed. Playing on that bumpy screen was Daisy's soft eyes and half smile. "It makes me happy." That next afternoon, the canning itself had been this amazing, unexpected bonding experience with Willow's mother. Daisy was overseeing operations in the soft chair they had dragged into the kitchen. Always perfect in fashion, Daisy's scarf was practical enough to keep her bald head warm, but perfectly matched her designer hoodie and sweatpants. She held a glass of wine in one hand. Willow thought there was a look of satisfaction on her sister's face. Maybe something in making the jam inspired her mom to tell Willow new stories. Willow had been describing her nice apartment and Murphy's board, something that had become a bigger financial strain after her divorce. Her mom countered with a story about her own struggles and deprivation when she was in her 20s and married to Willow's father. The story was about a leap of faith, a cross-country move away from their father's failing logging business towards managing some branch of a cousin's business. "I don't even know for sure what he did," her mom said. Willow stirred the fruit, waiting for the moment when she could scrape the wooden spoon down the middle of the saucepan, and the mixture would be too viscous to fill back in. Then it would be ready. Her mother continued telling her with no money or credit cards, her parents half a continent away and pregnant with Willow, her mother's little family had to survive more than 2 weeks on the canned goods they moved to Tennessee with them. They found $18 in change in an old Chianti bottle with a basket. Daisy ate baby cereal mashed into canned cherries, and they survived. From her soft chair in the present-day kitchen, Daisy lifted her wine glass as if toasting her mother. Willow took in the new induction range next to the original linoleum countertops. Her mom had more than enough money now. Although she splurged on things like the stove and cable TV, she also mostly lived as if she was about to move to Tennessee again. Her mom spoke about their poverty and their quick return to Washington State. She talked about earning her teaching certificate and insisted, "I wasn't ever going to worry about a paycheck again." Then that flu had come, claiming their father and leaving all three of them alone. Willow realized that her entire childhood had been saturated in ambiguous, unnamed fear, a fear that informed her mother's every move. She had taught her daughters hesitation and caution. She didn't tell them it was fear. Maybe she didn't know. "Willow?" Her mom was looking at her as if she'd already said something. "I said, is the jam ready?" Willow scraped the spoon, then nodded and pulled the pan off the burner. In that moment, she finally understood her mother's obsession with financial security. Her mom pulled out the first sterilized bell jar and Willow ladled the jam in. Leaving a 1/4 inch of space and removing the air bubbles, her mom wiped the rims, centered the lids, and applied the bands. She adjusted each one to what she called fingertip tight, just as she had done for Willow's entire life. The weekend had been good. Maybe because all three of them were in such harmony. Maybe because Willow and her mom were ignoring what it meant for the two of them if Daisy was gone. Maybe because for those days, Daisy was right there and they couldn't imagine a life where she wasn't. Willow didn't know when Daisy became the glue that held their family together. She just knew that Daisy had been her best friend for her entire life. During their early years, the first day of summer was the best kind of celebration for Daisy and Willow. Their mom would take them to the local library. Mrs. Nelson saw them coming and she laughed, I know, you can have your limits raised." Normally kids had to stop at 4 books, but Daisy and Willow could each check out 10. Because their mom had to be with them, the library was too far to walk, and she was working on the side to add their teacher's salary, they needed a lot of books. One time, Daisy said, "We should pick our books together, and then we would have twice as many to read." Willow sized up what was already in Daisy's arms. Anne of Green Gables, The Wind in the Willows, The Secret Garden. No. She was holding Black Beauty, Misty of Chincoteague, and Billy and Blaze. Okay, the last two were too young for her, but she was going to sketch from the pictures. Her mom would give her the backsides of used up paper and help her sharpen pencils. She read the man's name on the Misty book, Wesley Dennis, illustrator, and saw that Clarence Anderson did his own writing and drawing, so that's what she wanted to do someday. She did agree with Daisy about the Rats of Nim and about the C.S. Lewis books. Narnia. Man, if she could only get to Narnia. Their mom took weekends seriously. They would do household chores, work in the garden, and finish all their unpleasant tasks on Saturday. Sundays were for getting outside in the warm weather or for going to the movies and reading books when it was cold. They'd find themselves high on the hills outside of Wenatchee, pausing to catch their collective breath when they could listen to the church bells tolling. Their mom joked that the bells were tolling for them. So neither of the Tanner girls had any idea that Narnia was a version of Bible stories or that it was supposed to be anything other than an entirely new world of adventure. The best part of Sunday, especially if all their homework was finished, was when they could just fall back on the deep couch cushions and depart the everyday world for something contained entirely in words and their imagination spinning out of the books they read. Willow remembered the three of them as if those Sunday afternoons were one long day, with she and Daisy just spilling farther over the edges of the armchairs as they hooked their legs over one side and leaned against the other, growing older in these years of Sundays. In the winters, their mom would light the wood-burning stove and they sat tucked into soft fleece blankets, completely silent except for a page turned. Willow remembered being cocooned, a bowl of unpopped kernels and an empty mug of tea, the smell of wood smoke. The hours of repose were vital provisions for the time she would have to face out in the real world the next week. Sometimes they would even forget to make dinner. As they got older, one of them would jump up and ask, "Frozen pizza?" And the others would look up in a fog, characters slipping away from the present and back into their books until they all eventually shook off their respective reading worlds and gathered up around a cardboard crust and limp leek salad to talk about the upcoming week. When Daisy left for college, those Sundays were different. Without her positive glow, Willow didn't always want to come home. She had finished her job at the stable, riding the latest horse she was work leasing, and dreaming of owning one of her own. She usually found a way to spend time with the other barn rats. They weren't afraid to go get coffee in their dirty breeches and even pull their barn coats tighter to buy a movie ticket and smell of hay while they munched on popcorn. But she always felt something right below her ribs, like a clench across her heart when she walked into the house and saw her mom reading alone. Pizza, her mom would say. And Willow would say thanks, but she had homework and the popcorn had made her full. Looking back, maybe she was an angsty teen, but the big thing that she hadn't realized was the way Daisy held them together. Daisy made them want to come home. Daisy made them feel right around the dinner table. And now Daisy was more than gone at school. She was gone forever. The real problem Willow was facing, the answer she could never give to the questions people didn't know they were asking her, was that she had waited too long to make it back for Daisy's last moments. There was a presentation for work. Daisy told her to do the presentation. She told Willow she was fine. She told Willow she would be there when Willow got there the next day. Maybe Daisy didn't know how to say goodbye either. As soon as her mom left the message and before Willow gave the presentation, she was dashing for the airport, catching the first flight out. Even as the plane flew, Willow's heart couldn't stop racing, though she'd stopped sprinting down concourses. Now she leaned forward, gripping each of her armrests, staring unseeing. She ignored the nudge of the middle seat elbow, encouraging her to stop taking up so much room. She needed to be in the world. If she took up space, Daisy could continue to take up space too. Why didn't she skip the presentation? Could Daisy be dying? Really dying? The plane simply floated along, bumping on turbulence. For Willow, there was no sense of actual forward motion. She willed the pilot to break some rules, to fly faster, to fly at all. Surely they were simply hovering in the air, but she was also willing to stay suspended, a 737 in amber. If it meant time stopped and Daisy lived. She still had to change airlines in Seattle and fly to Wenatchee. Maybe she could rent a car and drive. She was starving and nauseated and bouncing her legs so hard that the middle seat elbow nudged her again. Breaking free of the sealed airplane, she ignored the departures board and rented a car. She would drive the 2.5 hours over the mountains, certain the action was necessary. Her mother's cell phone didn't work in the hospital. She had no news. At 1 a.m., the normal gridlocked Pacific Northwest traffic had dwindled to the occasional car, and she made good time. She kept doing math in her head, pushing harder on the gas. She was certain that she was making a good choice, renting the car, even if it was still February. Snoqualmie Pass was fine, freezing, and the interstate was smooth going. She gripped the steering wheel and ignored the oncoming lights, watching for deer and wondering if the light drizzle would turn to snow. When she turned off at Cle Elum, she bought coffee from the city gas station, checking her phone for what she missed in the dead zones of the first pass. Nothing. Then she was flying over Blewett Pass, only 65 miles to Wenatchee. The action of steering and speeding and braking felt as if she was doing something when she knew there was nothing she could do. She was lost in memories of Daisy and how she'd always been the perfect big sister, from holding her hand when they had to be flower girls in their aunt's wedding to telling her not to be shy about pleasuring herself during sex. Daisy had always led the way and showed Willow the world. It was 3 a.m. and she was back in junior high with Daisy, teaching her to dance. Step, touch, step, touch. The car began to sail toward the shoulder. Snapping alert, she instinctively turned her wheel into the skid just as her tires grabbed gravel and caught traction. She heaved all of her strength onto the brakes and slid, gasping to a stop on the mix of dead grass and gravel on the shoulder. Her entire body thudded, and the steering wheel was damp in her hands. Black ice. She needed to be more careful. She needed to see Daisy. Taking deep breaths in through her nose and blowing out through pursed lips, she put her blinker back on and headed down the pass. Soon the temperature was coming up and she was on dry pavement. With a right turn, she was on Washington State Highway 285 and only 20 miles from Wenatchee. The map voice brought her to the front of the hospital, and then she wasted precious minutes figuring out the one-way streets until she could make her way around to the back parking lot and where the emergency entrance was. Stopped, angled across the parallel lines in the nearly empty asphalt expanse, she slammed on the brakes and left the car, taking 2 spaces as she sprinted for the entrance. The automatic doors parted too slowly, and she found herself turning sideways to get through. Her mom's cell phone was dead or off, so panting at the desk, she said, "Daisy, where is Daisy Tanner?" The urgency squeaked her voice and gave her a hiccuping half sob at the end of her words. The woman tapped keys, waited, looked up from the computer, offering a room number and pointing her finger. Willow ran. But running didn't matter, and the woman had her information wrong. When she turned into room 5104, there was a stripped bare mattress. The nurse at the station pressed her lips together and her eyes slid away when Willow asked, "Where is Daisy Tanner?"